Okay, there I can see you all too. Great. Okay, guys, structured literacy with small groups. Here we go. I wanted to share with you this great infographic that IDA just put out just late last year in 2023 October, and I really like it because it's it's more comprehensive than the ones I've showed you before that showed like the what of structured literacy and the how on two they were like the circles. I showed that to you, I think, in an asynchronous video, and they were like circles within circles. And this is just, I like this better because it also includes the who, as you see there at the top, students and instructors, and then the why down at the bottom, which is, of course, the science of reading. But I wanted to, and I think, yeah, when you will share this slideshow, of course, and if you click on this graphic, it'll actually take you to like a bigger version of it. But I wanted to just point out to you that what you've done so far with what we've taught you how to do and what you've done so far with your one-on-one student is definitely considered tier 3. Why? Because it is one-on-one, right? Meaning it's very intensive. It's frequent. It happens, 2 to 4 times a week and at different durations, either 50 or 25 minutes, right? So you are learning how to do a tier 3 intervention. And as you see on this chart, typically that is done by a dyslexia specialist, a special education teacher, or as you see the arrow shows, any individuals with who are considered highly qualified would be anybody who's certified. So when you come to, even if you're not considered of course, IDA is going to use their terminology, which is dyslexia specialist. But for us, that would be a CALP, right? So you're on the pathway. So those would be essentially equivalent kinds of certifications. Okay, so you don't necessarily have to be a special education teacher. Many of you are not special education teachers, but anybody who pursues this kind of training is considered and gets their CALP from Alto is highly qualified in structured literacy. So today, though, we're going to talk more about sort of tier 2. Which says they're general or special education teacher, reading specialist, intervention personnel, and kind of another sort of difference maker in that tier 1, 2, 3 thing is group size. And so we're going to talk about that next. This is something that I just put in here, actually, even since the last session that we had with our spring cohort. I got this from Stephanie Stoller, who is an instructor at Mount St. Joe in their reading science program, and she's just also has Reading Science Academy is her consulting company, and which is fabulous. I would recommend that to anyone. You can get an annual subscription, and she's got a whole ton of content on there on everything you could possibly think of. And if she doesn't have it on there, you can ask her and she'll get you some content on it. So she's wonderful. But this was just an interesting, I'm not going to dwell on this, but I just thought it was really interesting how it shows grouping options. And when kids are not at grade level, how long are they spending in instruction over their heads? If you see that first column there, in other words, like they're just not getting anything out of that, right? So this is a great sort of matrix to look at for, I think, MTSS groups or discussions you're having in your buildings about how we're going to group kids, and using every minute of every day to its benefit. Okay, working with small groups. So if we think back at that IDA chart, the what, the how, and the why are the same, right? What we're doing with kids, whether that be in tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3, is the same. How we're doing it is the same, and why we're doing it is the same. So the difference is the who, the when, and the where. So in terms of your practicum, the who is, or just in general, the who is referring to number of students, sort of ratio of student to teacher. So in terms of your practicum, what we want to make sure, and this is guidance actually also from IDA and other places, that groups be no larger than 4 students. So for your practicum, if you're going to do a group, you cannot have more than 4 students. I would recommend you try to get more like 3, just because working with a group is not exactly the same as working with one-on-one kids, which is what we'll talk about today. And you need to have some practice, and the fewer students you're practicing with, the better. But as you get more adept at it, you'll see that it just is, it's the same stuff, the same content you're delivering, just the delivery is a bit different. I would argue that doing a group requires a more skilled interventionist than a one-on-one, because you've just got other things that you've got to deal with the more kids that are sitting in front of you. The when, in terms of frequency, duration, intensity, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then just to reiterate one more time, where intervention is not a place, right? Gone should be the days when a student qualifies for special education and then goes down the hall to that other teacher. Intervention should be we should have a systematic approach to intervention, which is why we have MTSS, the MTSS framework. And so just keeping in mind, it's not about, oh, okay, well, Johnny goes to see, Mrs. Smith every day for 30 minutes, so we're good. Okay, well, what is Mrs. Smith doing, right? So things to think about for group work. How are you going to stay organized? Something you're going to have to consider. How will you deal with off-task behavior? Because that's going to happen, right? And how will you translate the strategies you've learned in a one-on-one setting to small groups? So that's most of what we're going to cover today, okay? Because as I said, the content of what you're teaching isn't going to change. Other things to consider, of course, having kids grouped appropriately is a big factor. You don't want kids at majorly different levels sitting in front of you, right? You want to try to group them in terms of their skill levels, in terms of what you're focusing on, as closely as possible. And again, you can see how the intensity of the intervention, by definition, cannot be as intense as it is with one-on-one, because you're having to take into consideration the needs of all the students in your group, right? You can't be as targeted, because there's just no way that all the kids sitting in front of you are at the same place, unless maybe they're like just coming into kindergarten and they know zero. Procedures, we're just going to tweak the procedures you already know. And I would just give you a little hint to avoid any kind of multi-sensory stuff like sand or shaving cream. There are many ways to do things in a multi-sensory way that don't involve these elaborate sort of things. I mean, yes, kids like them, but they're just very difficult to. They take a lot of time. They're difficult to really control what the kids are doing. So I would just not do any of that. Maybe for fun in a center somewhere, kids can write in the sand, sure, but not during our group time. Organization, of course, very important. Keeping track of your records, data, as well as all of your materials. So think about all the materials you have, and then multiply that by 4, right? In terms of your sound circles, all that kind of stuff. Lesson length. You may not have a 50-minute time frame like you do for your group, like you maybe do with your one-on-one student. Some of you already do 25-minute lessons with one-on-one, so this won't be any different. But if you currently do 50-minute lessons with your one-on-one, just know you can do 25-minute lessons. They just have to be 4 times a week, because you are still expected to get through 2 lessons a week, even with your group. Okay, so if you are used to doing 50-minute lessons and you're now going to do 25-minute lessons, that's going to be another little bit of a learning curve for you. Okay, essentially, you just go through the first half of the lesson through the guided discovery, and that's part 1, day 1, and then the day 2 starts with encoding. But just be aware that that's going to be a change for you. And then we already talked about intervention is not a place. All right, guys, student materials. You may choose to have a Word Detective notebook for every single kid in the group, or you can have some other kind of student-centered resource. Once you leave your practicum, once you're done with Jen and I, and you're done with all of this, you will have the ability to tweak and make your intervention, the way you do structured literacy with your students, make it your own, right? And I've seen teachers come up with you guys are like the most creative people ever, much more creative than I am. And I've seen people use composition books, right? That kids are bringing to school anyway. Usually it's on their supply list, and kind of making different sections of that and adding things to it. And so I don't know, it's up to you. You can use parts of the Word Detective Notebook. I would try to use something that is that resource for a kid, right? To be able to see what we've covered and what we haven't. So just kind of food for thought. I would have a Ziploc baggie or some other kind of container that has everything needed for each kid, right? So you can just pull those out. Everybody gets their bag, and then it's like, okay, get out your sound circles, put those away, get out your syllable squares, that kind of thing. You guys know about this, right? Small dry erase boards with markers, erasers. Every student will need their own word list, right? So now you're going to want to make copies of that. And then their paper for encoding. Certainly you could do the word list on one side and the encoding paper on the other side. So student materials, teacher materials. Of course, you're going to need any relevant cards that you need for your lesson. You need to have your lesson plan and the word list for you, everything that you have for the one-on-one lesson, essentially, right? You probably are going to want to start a concepts checklist for your group. And if you are somebody that does multiple groups, maybe not now, but in the future, you're going to want a concept checklist for every group. For every group that you, or individual student, because you do also have the option to start an individual student. Okay. You also might want to have behavior incentives, some kind of system where you're rewarding good behavior kind of thing, maybe. But again, you guys it's not like you haven't worked with groups before. Obviously you have. This is now just tweaking the actual procedures that we for these kinds of lessons. So let's talk about procedures. Here are some essentials of active participation. Active participation is the key to any good instruction. Jen and I have tried to instill that in you as much as possible throughout our work, in terms of asking students to respond either verbally or by showing you a hand motion or something, moving sound circles. As much as you can keep kids actively participating, the better. And that is even more so with a group, because the last thing you want is downtime, right? So frequent requests for responses, requiring overt responses, right? Saying something, writing something, doing something, involving all the students. So no hand raising, right? Structure the active participation procedure. All right, so under that essential number 4, structuring active participation procedures. You're going to want probably those fall under 2 categories for us. One is called choral responding, and the other one is what we call holdups. So I'm going to hold something up, right? My whiteboard, or maybe I'm going to show you with my fingers, right? Tapping. And so all of those require signals. You see that I've highlighted the word signal right there many times. Another word for that would be prompt or cue. Those all mean the same thing. And we need to be really clear with our kids. Again, you don't really have to do that cueing with a one-on-one student, because they know when you want them to respond, right? They're the only ones going to respond. Now you've got multiple kids who are going to respond. And you all know that if you let some kids just sit there and do nothing, they will sit there and do nothing, right? So we're going to make this a much more active procedure here. So one way to do that maybe would be first in the phonemic awareness. So if we look at phonemic awareness, the first thing that we do with our kids, very much of it is the same, but again, it's the cueing that has to be different. And that's up to you as a teacher. Number 1, to establish the procedures for signaling or cueing or prompting. And you got to teach it to the kids. It's not hard to teach it to them. They get it pretty easily, as long as you are consistent. You are going to be the one that's going to have to practice this. Okay, so for example, for blending, I will say the sounds at 1 second per sound, like I do with my one-on-one kid. And then I need to give them a cue for when I want them to respond. That's the cue. What I'm cueing there is a choral response. So I might say, what word? Okay, and then they say the word. Or I could do I can do physical signals. Those generally look like I point to myself if it's my turn. So I'll say, look at me, listen, b, l, n, t. And then if I point to them, they don't respond until I point to them. Okay. So just that gesture of like, if I'm pointing to me, it's my turn. If I'm pointing to you, it's your turn. Okay. For segmenting, this is where if you haven't been using the cue of home base, you definitely are going to want to do that here. That's a great example of a cue that you might already be using. Home base, right? That means like reset. So home base, say switch, students repeat, switch. Okay, here's the other important thing, giving wait time. Essentially what we're doing here is we know that kids are going to process information and be ready to respond at different rates, and that's fine. What we're trying to avoid here is the kid that constantly just gives the answer right away, right? Is blurting out as soon as, because they're the fast processor. Well, that's great, but the kid over here needs a little bit more time. So again, this is not something you've had to do in your one-on-one work. You have not had to give wait time because they just respond when they respond, okay? So you're going to have to, again, I say give wait time right there to remind you don't say show me right away. That's your cue for this one is show me, because they're actually going to show you the circles, right? But you got to give the wait time in between from when they repeated the word. Okay. And if you have questions along the way, please feel free to type them in the chat and Jen can interrupt me if it's something we need to talk about right then. I know we're moving fast. Okay, alphabet. Things to think about in this part. Maybe you want alphabet arcs for every kid, right? If you're going to do the alphabet arcs, probably every kid needs one. That completely depends, I think, on the grade level that you're working with. If you're working with kinders or first graders, or even like, our intervention second graders, you might want an alphabet arc for every kid. Okay. And I'm not saying you can't even use it for older groups of kids. It's just think about, your purpose in that section of the lesson is letter naming and sequencing. So how are you going to get active participation from all the kids in those two things, right? You might want alphabet. You don't necessarily have to have an alphabet strip for every kid. If you use, but you have the desk size ones, if you just have one strip on the desk, laying on the desk for them all to look at, that might be all you have room for. You might not want 4 of these laying there, but again, you can decide. If you want more of those alphabet things, the website for how to get them is alphabetletter.com. It's right there on the strip itself. So if you want more arcs, if you want more of these, they're like, I don't know, I was just looking at the prices the other day. It's like $1.50 or something for the strips, I think. Yeah. So good investment of money, I would say, especially if you are a teacher of younger kids, because I think you could see how those alphabet arcs and letters in particular could be really great for a whole classroom, right? Or a center area. Okay, so in terms of the missing letter decks, your cards, right? You could deal those out, deal one to each kid, or put them in a pile in the middle and let them pick randomly a card. And then each kid studies their card and gets ready to say their sequence of letters while the other kid is thinking, right? So everybody gets a card, and then we start with this kid. He says his 3 letters, then the next kid, then the next kid, then the next kid. Okay. So that's a way to do that. Again, just giving lots of opportunities for active participation. And in this case, that would be naming letters of the alphabet and sequencing them. Oh, notice here too, guys, you actually could also, I didn't put this on here, but you could do RAND charts too. But again, think about it. The letters that are unknown to kid A might not be the same letters that are unknown to kid B, right? Or kid C or kid D. And that's again where you're letting go. It's a little bit of loosening of some of that, some of the what word am I looking for? The sort of clinical nature of the one-on-one. You kind of have to let some of that go with group, because you're just not going to be able to target necessarily every single kid's areas of weakness, right? Or needs. Okay, review words. Same thing, you're doing the review section, they're gonna read review words. So here's my suggestion about this. For the homogeneous reading, which is down the columns, right? Going down. I would do going down round robin, so that I'm not having one kid read all of the EE words. Every kid in the group gets a chance to read an EE word, and more than one probably, by doing round robin down the list. So this is great for active participation because they have to keep track of where they are. I have to listen to what my friend said, and I have to know that my turn is coming up. This is where pointing is so crucial. Even if you're not the one reading the word, you should be pointing at the word. Okay. So down round robin. And then what we can do is when we go back up the list, that can be choral. We can do that in unison. Okay. So down and up, and then we get to our heterogeneous read. Okay. Again, I would do the heterogeneous read going across. So again, it's not that Johnny does this whole row. It's, Johnny, Marcia, and Henry. And then we'll talk about that in a second, how you should do that if there's exactly the same number of kids as there are lists. But I mean, going across, every time there's a new word to be read, a new kid is reading it. Okay. Include yourself. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, yeah, because the group is such a different beast than one-on-one. A lot of the observations I'm saying, we're getting a lot of extra teacher talk. This is a time when you definitely want to streamline each section as well as you can and just have it zip, 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 individual words, those hand signals like you were saying. Otherwise, a lot of time is going to be wasted. So that's all.
Excellent
Just
point.
wanted to mention
That
that.
is such a great point, and it's so true. The more kids involved, the more chances of them trying to interject about what they did this weekend. Which is why you want to hone all of that as much as you can in one-on-one, and it becomes second nature to you. That's an excellent point. These lessons can go way off. You had your timing exactly right with one-on-one, and then you go to do a group and it's like, oh my God, it took me 50 minutes to do half the lesson. Yeah, that's you need to change something. Okay, very good. So here's an example of what I mean by down, up, and then across. So the A, B is the kids, right? So this is how you would read a list with 3 kids, A, B, their names are A, B, and C. And so the list number 1, that's the X words, right? Going down the list, it goes A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C. Coming back up the list, it's A, B, C, A, B, C, A, B, C, everybody, right? Okay. And so there you go. There's just a little visual of what that's supposed to be helpful. I don't know if it is or not, but okay, here's an example of 3 kids, 3 lists. As you know, well, maybe you don't know yet. In the intermediate lesson plan, you actually have 3 review lists. Okay. So if you're in a situation where you have 3 review lists and you also have 3 kids, what would happen when you read across the rows is that every single kid would just read the same row or column, right? It would go A, B, C, A, B, C. So that's why over here in heterogeneous, we add in, we add in the T, which stands for teacher. So that just means you now include yourself in reading the words going across. so that it's not going to, so everybody gets a different type of word, which is the whole point of the heterogeneous read, is to read different types of words. Okay. PG mapping. Again, it just goes back to the cueing, whether that some kind of signal, could be pointing, maybe some kind of verbal cue from you, and again, providing think time. So I might point to myself and say, look at me, say B, and then I point to the students. The highlighting here is meaning that's who I'm pointing to. Students will say B. And then I might even point to my own head and I might say, think. Sometimes that cue right there, think, is you're cueing them that you're going to give them time to think. What can spell B, but I'm not going to point to them until I've given them the think time, and then I point and they say B in unison, and then they write and name. Okay. Spelling. Of course, the spelling section, as you know, is highly scripted. Lots of guided questioning that we have kids think through and respond to us with. So we're going to ask those questions randomly. Not randomly as in like asking whatever question we want. We're going to ask random children the sequence of questions. So I'm not going to have Molly do the whole procedure with the first word. I'm going to randomly ask. I'm going to ask the questions as I would with a one-on-one kid, but the kids don't know who I'm going to call on. Okay, so this is another highly effective strategy for active engagement, is randomness, when they don't know who you're going to call on. Okay, so I might say, if it's Rip, I might say Rip. Everybody says Rip, right? I might say, Luke, is Rip simple or complex? And Luke is going to tell me simple, hopefully, right? Jill will say the sounds, but everybody will tap. Okay, so Jill's going to tell us the sounds while she taps, but everybody is tapping. All right. And now everyone will tap, and Kyle will name the graphemes. All right, so Kyle's going RIP, but everybody is tapping. And then everyone can write a name. Okay. And you can eventually shorten these prompts, just like your regular, it's so funny, as you know, your one-on-one kids understand and get the procedures of the lesson often more quickly and better than you do. And they will remind you, hey, weren't we supposed to read those words going across? I can't tell you the number of observations I've done where the kid has saved your butt because they remind you about what you're supposed to do. All right, so you know, once you do that, the more you do this, they just come to expect it and they get it. But you do have to explicitly teach your expectations and practice them. Okay, dictation. Same procedures as one-on-one, but here's what you need to think about. The students are going to get done writing each sentence at different times. So, you know, we dictate sentence number 1. We do all of the same questioning that we do for a one-on-one kid, right? Oh, who broke their leg? Jim broke his leg. Oh, what did Jim break? His leg. Oh, Jim broke his leg. Okay, whatever the sentence is, right? Do all that. Now they're going to write. So I literally want you to think about and then tell me or type in the chat, how are you going to keep the other kids occupied when Molly is still writing? If Molly's still writing, you can't go on to the next sentence in terms of giving it to them. So what are you going to do? You could have the kids that are done writing the sentence, edit it, right? Check it for cops. You could go ahead and do that. Yes, Andrea, have them reread and check their sentence. Have them check the sentence. Yep. They could do that. They're going to do it again later in the procedures, but there's no reason they can't do it now. Because later in the procedures, it'll be, it's fine if they've already found some of their errors. They could also, thank you, Alexa, they could read the word lists. You could say, okay, go back to your word lists. I want you to silently read your word list until we're ready to give the next sentence. Yep. Literally anything reading, anything literacy related that is occupying their time would be fine. Okay. All right, oral reading, guys. Okay, this is this can be one of the most difficult parts. Let's talk first about controlled text. Let's think about this for a second. The controlled text is controlled by what? How do we know that a text is controlled when in talking in our lessons? What do we mean by controlled text? What kinds of words are in there? Yes, thank you, Stephanie and Laura. Yeah, only concepts they've been taught or we know they know them. We know the words. Yes, good. So a little bit of an issue here. The words that Johnny knows might not be the words that Jen knows in terms of those known words, right, that we get from the core. But certainly we can control them for the content we've taught, which should be the bulk of the words in the controlled text anyway, because that's the whole point of the controlled text, is to read the types of words that we've just, right, especially that new concept. Okay, so the other thing that's cool about controlled is that because they can code the words, they can apply the strategies that we've taught them, they can independently practice reading the controlled text. Okay. So that'd be one option, is for them to practice it independently, and it gives them that's that opportunity for repeated reading, right? The other thing we can do is read the story together, because we're all reading the same word, like it's the same passage for everybody. Echo read, choral reads, we can scoop phrases, lots of stuff we can do with this controlled text that's very similar to the one-on-one lesson. Okay. The issue is you can't really take, this is where data in terms of your group work is extremely difficult, because in any section, because who are you going to look at that day for data, right? When they're reading the word list, how are you going to keep track of which kid read which word? And then to get percentages from that, I mean, it's a nightmare. So that's the other way that you can see what I mean by group work, by definition, is just, it has to have more relaxed expectations. And you have to think creatively about other ways that you can get data on kids. Luckily, and hopefully, you have a robust MTSS system that includes screening and progress monitoring. And we know that there are some, like things like Acadience or Dibbles, these ways of monitoring student progress, where we know what the benchmark is for phoneme segmentation. We know the benchmark for nonsense word fluency. Those are all measures that will absolutely improve as a result of your intervention. And is another way to track, and should be how we track, along with our data in our actual lessons, a kid's progress. Again, but how robust of a system you have of MTSS in your buildings will vary greatly. But just know that there are other ways to track the progress of students that are very targeted and are targeting the most predictive skills, right? The skills that we know predict future reading success, such as the ones that Acadience and Dibbles look at. Okay, STAR Reader is not one of those things, by the way. We're not going to use STAR to track student progress in terms of progress monitoring. It might be an approved one from the state of Ohio, but it's not appropriate. Just my little 2 cents. Anyway, let's think about regular text. Now, tell me what regular text is. How do we know what a regular text is for a student? If you already watched the regular text videos, Stephanie, what if your school uses STAR? Well, that's a longer conversation. I would suggest you personally could use Acadience measures to monitor your own groups of kids. That's what I did when I was a teacher. We used the BAS, right? The Fontes and Pinnell, whatever reading system that was like levels, which is no way to progress monitor your students' reading skills. So I just got the free resources from Acadience, which was Dibbles at the time, and monitored kids on my own every week. But yep, Dibbles is free, Acadience is free. All right, regular text. How do we know? How do we know regular? What do you mean, Andrea? Regular text is based on grade level. Oh, I know what you mean. You mean regular text is controlled by grade. That's exactly correct. Regular text, let's all be clear, still is controlled. It's simply controlled in a different way. It is controlled by the grade level. So Dibbles, Acadience, Ames Web, they have grade level passages that that are equivalent passages. These are all first grade level passages. These are second grade level. Very good. So guess what? In your little reading group, number one, you might have kids that are so low, they're not even reading regular text yet. If you can't even read first grade level text with 95% accuracy, then we're not even going to use regular text with you in intervention, right? You have to at least be able to read first grade level text, 95% accuracy. But even in any given group of kids, you might have one that's reading first grade level, one that's reading second grade level, one that's reading third grade level, right? In terms of that. So you're not going to be able to chorally read or echo read or whatever a regular text. What I would do is I would pick one student that you're going to intervene with that day on their regular text. And you can either send the other students back to class, or they can quietly go to another place in the room and read their passages silently. I mean, and then they do their best, right? Again, it shouldn't be too terribly difficult because they're supposed to be able to read it at 95%. We don't give kids regular text that they can't read at 95% accuracy. So it still should be okay for them to sit there and read. But then again, they're just sitting there and reading. And meanwhile, you all know what it's like to try to like work one-on-one at a table with a kid, right? And inevitably another kid's going to come over and be like, what's this word? What are we supposed to be doing? Right? So you can kind of decide that for yourself, how you want to use that time. Maybe you just use controlled text and you don't do regular text with your intervention group.
Kara, could we reiterate then, with controlled text, you're going to have your whole group with you.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is going to be working, everybody's going to be reading, you're echoing, your choral, etc. But with regular text, you are working only one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
Whether the other kids go back to class or do something else. And then you're rotating through the kids on that regular intervention. And don't you also recommend, like, sometimes you do control, sometimes you do regular, kind of go back and forth, similar to what you recommend when they move to the intermediate lesson plan? Do you want to just talk that for half a second?
Sure. Yeah, great. Absolutely. You know what, guys, this is where, as you become more expert at being a diagnostician, at being somebody who can look at the needs of the kids and see, well, this is what, here's what else, here's the other thing. What's happening in the regular classroom? If your regular ed tier 1 curriculum has no controlled text at all, then you are the one place where this student can practice controlled text, right? Controlled books. So I would probably hit that pretty hard. It depends on the age of the students as well, right? If you've got kids who are, if you're doing a group work with older kids, maybe 4th, 5th, 6th, who, you know, usually by definition, those are not the most, they already have reading skill. You're kind of being real targeted about a lot of times about certain syllable types you need to teach, and especially like spelling, or you are specifically focusing on fluency. If there's a real need for fluency work, then you might want to not do controlled text with them and do regular text with them and just pick one kid at a time. Again, because they should be able to do repeated reading student only? That is the least intensive repeated reading intervention that we have. In other words, the student goes and reads it on their own multiple times. The idea being that when you call them back and time them again, they have gotten better. So it's really it's a really sort of intricate and complicated sort of way of looking at and taking into consideration all those factors, and you really being the expert in, well, what do these kids need? So yes, it could be controlled text one day, regular text the next day, or however it works. You have to be the one to make those decisions. Okay. All right, we are not going to learn from an example, but we are going to talk about now what? Okay, can I work with a group now? Yes, you can. Especially if you don't have exactly 30 hours with your one-on-one student. Remember that we said you needed 30 hours with your one-on-one student. Well, if you don't have exactly 30 hours with your one-on-one student, but it's even more important for you to now start a group, because time is ticking and you need 60 hours of a practicum done before the end of the school year. So you need to have been in this lecture, right? And as the emails that I sent last week or so said, you could get started with a small group or another one-on-one student, and you have to go through any assessment that you do with that student or that group does not count towards your practicum. Neither do the universal lessons. You need to do them. You're going to put a 0 in the column for minutes, because you're not going to get a credit again for doing those pre-scripted lessons that are already written for you. Okay. But anyway, how big can my group be? No more than 4 students. If I teach first grade and I want to use my students for small group, is that okay? Yes, it is. Your group and or new one-on-one student, if you choose to do another one-on-one student, does not have to be in second grade. They can be kinder or first. Okay? Because the point of this, number one, is to give you experience with a group, and or it is so rich to get experience with a different kind of kid. So years ago, when I first started doing this, everybody actually had to do 2 kids. You did one kid for 30 hours and then you did another kid for 30 hours. And I really liked that model a lot. There were some drawbacks too, but I liked it because you got experience. Every single kid is different. Every kid you work with is different. There is no kid that is dyslexic that is the same. So, or in any other aspect of them. So it really is great to get experience during your practicum with different kinds of situations and different kinds of kids. And so that's the whole point of us, the main point of us allowing you to do group work and or another one-on-one person. Okay. But you are not done with your one-on-one student. You continue with your one-on-one student and you do all of your observations with that student, that first student. Okay. Yes, you can start a new one-on-one student instead of starting a group, and they may be in first grade or kindergarten. But again, universal lessons and any kind of coring that you do or whatever you do to get your groups or a new kid, those don't count in terms of the numbers. Okay. How do I track my lessons? So you will track your lessons, of course, but you're going to use a new lesson log. Every lesson log, and just for your FYI, for your future practice, every lesson log, every group and or kid should get their own lesson log, because that's where you keep track of exactly what you've taught and what you've reviewed and all, and the date, and it's just good record keeping. Okay. Private students, I still use the same exact lesson log for all my private kids. So it's called lesson log B, and you will notice that you don't have a tab that says assessment B or known words for reading and spelling B. You don't have those because we don't care to see those. The only thing you're tracking for your second group or one-on-one is the lesson log. If for some reason you've already had to switch kids and now you need another lesson log, please let me know and I will create a lesson log C for you. I don't know if that's happened to anybody, but if you need one, I can do that. When do I need to reach 60 hours? Well, by the last day of school, ideally. We do allow people, we know that there are extenuating circumstances and life happens. So we do allow you to work through the summer if you need to, as far into the summer as you need to. But remember, that still has to be, with your one-on-one kid, because probably you have to have your observations with your one-on-one kid, right? All 5 of them. So, you can continue into the summer, but that can be a big pain in the butt. So I would do my best if I was you to get all the hours in before the last day of school. And I just want to note that this is laid out for you also in your the procedures that you read over and signed in the very beginning of all of this, right? Less than 5 students. You have to accrue at least 15 hours with your group. You have to provide 100 minutes a week. That's the expectation, just like your one-on-one. You could even do another one-on-one student, 15 hours, blah, blah, blah. So let's take a look at how you could meet the 60-hour requirement. For example, you could have the student A would be your one-on-one student. And let's say you got 39 hours with them. The minimum was 30. So yes, you met that. And then you also did a group of 3 kids and you got 21 hours with them. Is that a minimum of 15? Yes, it is. So is this an acceptable way to complete your practicum? Yes, it is. Or you could have taken on another one-on-one student and you did 45 hours with the first kid and you did 15 hours with the second kid. That equals 60. And they both have a minimum of 15. So that is also acceptable. Remembering though that the asterisk means you cannot include the time it took you to do any assessments that you might do. And you can't include the universal introductory lessons in those 60 hours. You do them, you just don't count the minutes. Here are some unacceptable ways of getting 60 hours. You cannot decide 1 month before the end of school, oh crap, I'm not going to get my hours in. Let me just grab a group from down the hall and do some stuff with them for a month. That is not the point of doing small group. It's not about just padding your hours to meet 60. It's about truly getting that extra experience doing group work and or another student. Okay. Nor can you do 5 different groups and do 5 hours each. No, it has to be 1 group or 1 more student. Okay. Now, some of you I know have just taken off with this is what you do for all of your groups now, right? If you're that kind of a person that has that situation. And that's great, but you need to pick 1 group that you're going to count for your hours, okay? Oh, so will I have 60 hours before the end of the school year? Well, that's for you to calculate. You need to think about how many do you have now? And here's some things to consider. There are 16 weeks between February 5th and May 24th. I don't know when your school gets out. You all come from 10 different schools. So I don't know what your schedule is. You do though. So you can do this math. If you have a spring break, obviously you can't work with your kid on spring break. Are you going to be tied up for a week or more with testing, mandated spring testing in your district? I don't know. Are you going to be able to still work with your kid? I would certainly try to make that happen. Winter is not over. We could still have snow days or freezing fog days or whatever the heck. You're going to get ill. Your kid's going to get ill. All these things. But if you used those 16 weeks to their fullest extent, that's 100 minutes per week. That's 1,600 minutes. That's a possibility of 26 hours. So please know that, yes, it absolutely is doable for you to get 15 hours extra, right? It's definitely doable. All right, so in order to kind of check in with everybody about this and how they're, it's also not mandatory. You do not have to do a group, and you do not have to take on another one-on-one kid, okay? Not mandatory, but necessary for some of you, especially if you want to reach the 60 hours. So when you go to do your knowledge check on this lecture and on Canvas, we're going to ask you, how many practicum hours do you currently have? How many observations have you completed? And telling us whether or not you plan to begin a small group or one-on-one student. That's just those are just literally number, yes or no. Okay. So just be ready for that question when it comes up. All right. I'm going to escape from this so that I can answer any other questions that you might have about group. Stephanie
Kara,
asked,
I have a few points to make, just to reiterate.
please. Yep.
Just because we've done this with our spring cohort and there've been quite a few questions come in, so maybe we can cut a few off of the pass. Okay, small group. Do you have to do it? No,
Yes,
you
no.
don't have to.
Nope.
If you don't need the hours, you don't have to do it. If you don't, okay. If you need extra hours, do you have to do small group, or could you start another one-on-one student?
Either, Stephanie says. Dawn, thank you. Yes.
Yep.
Andrea says one-on-one. Yep. Either one.
You can do an individual, and that means obviously you won't have to implement some of these small group strategies. Okay. Do Kara and I and Ashley and Kristen, do we have to approve your new group or student? No, we don't. Do you have to do the core to assess to determine which child or children you'll be working with? Do you have to do the core? Oh, what are some
No.
options? What are some options that you may already have at your school?
Yeah.
Acadians.
Acadians, middle of the year testing, Dibbles. Yep, exactly.
Yep, try to find kids that have similar skills, right? So you won't have a massive difference in their skill levels. Good. Can you count well, first of all, do you have to do the universal lessons if you start a new group, or are you with your new student? You must. Do you know why? Is it because we're mean? Why is it necessary to do your universal lessons? Well, we are mean. No, we love you. We want you to do your
Don't ask
best.
them that.
They need to know all of our like terminology and the rules and things like that we use all the way through CALP.
Exactly, Andrea. They've got to know the procedures. They need to learn the scripts. They've got to see keyword and sound cards, the concept cards, all of those things. They have to be introduced to those. They have to understand that. And because you've already done that, that's why it can't count towards your 60 hours. But we do need you to log it. We want to see that you've done it with the date. Unfortunately, you have to put a 0, but then once the universal lessons are finished, then you can start counting your hours. Okay. Can you do an observation with your small group or with your second or new practicum, new student? No, your observation must be with your original practicum student because they're further along and we need to see some of those concepts that happen later on in the, the scope and sequence within that concepts manual. Okay. Is it okay? Let's say you're way behind hours, like you're sitting at 20 hours right now. Is it okay for you to move to to seeing your current practicum student 3 times a week? Is that okay?
As in complete 3 lessons.
As in complete 3 lessons a week. Thanks. Thanks, Karen.
We've got yes, we've got no, we've got no. Oh, boy, this was a good question.
The answer is yes. If you are way behind on your hours and you need to get cracking with your practicum student, you may bump to doing 3 lessons a week. What does that mean though? Well, obviously you've got to find the time to meet with your student, and that might mean meeting with them before school or after school too, if there's not time during the school day. That also means you've got to plan 3 lessons a week. Y'all are getting better at that, but that's going to be more prep on your part. Okay, those are the primary things that I wanted to talk to you about because those are questions that have come up with our spring cohort.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. You betcha.
You probably would be expecting to have to answer some of those questions on the follow-up quiz too, probably.
Perhaps.
Great. Any other questions though?
Do we have to get the parent signatures forms filled out? Okay.
Nope.
It's
mean,
more like if your school requires it, but
Yes.
you're not going to be filming this child, and we're not going to, or children, and we're not going to be seeing them. So,
Great question.
Mhm.
Can you write that one down too, Jen, so I can add that into next year's lecture? Thank you. Good. Okay, cool. All right. If you have any questions about any of it, please don't hesitate to contact your supervisors. Not a problem. Okay.
talk to your VIP first.
Oh, your VIP. Don't,
Yeah.
check in with your VIP. Will we be going
Absolutely.
over intermediate lessons today? No, all the information about intermediate lessons is contained in the video assignment for that. And if you have specific questions about the intermediate lesson plan, come to office hours or set up a time. Jen and I are happy to meet with any of you outside of office hours time. So please, I would highly encourage you, to dig into that intermediate lesson plan too. I know it's really not that scary. But it is a little bit different in terms of what you end up focusing on. But I mean, 90% of it is the same, but no.
Kara,
Yeah.
I had sent an email about how to figure out like controlled text, or not controlled text, regular text. I had sent an email about how to figure like, do I take time out of my lessons and instead of doing a lesson, do I test? Can that go towards my hours, or do I need to do that outside of the hours?
So typically finding regular text level, which we are going to review today, there's lectures about it, a recorded lecture about it, but we will go over today how to work through that process. And usually in terms of what the kid does, it's just read 3 passages, right? So you absolutely can have the kid read the 3 passages from whatever grade level you're focusing on for that time in the lesson. Like that could be, that's going to take you 5 minutes, right? You introduce it, you let them read for a minute, you give them the next passage, they read for a minute, you give them the next passage, they read for a minute. So finding the regular text level can absolutely be done in the lesson, because then later you take that data and you figure out what you're going to do with it. Maybe you need to have them read 3 more, right? You can have them read the 3 more at the next lesson.
Okay, so I can do that instead of like the regular oral reading. They would just read 3 passages instead
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. Just put it right.
Okay.
You don't have to pull them at a separate time.
Okay. Thank you.
And
Sure.
I'll just remind y'all that before you move to the intermediate lesson, one of your supervisors would like to approve that. And I'm seeing that quite a bit as people are turning in observation 3,
Yeah.
that we're ready to move them out of alphabet and PA and move them into the regular text. So we just want to touch base with you, whether it's when you hand in an observation or, if you're kind of between observations and you just want to touch base on that to see if you can switch out.
Yeah, that's definitely, thank you. That's a conversation. And sometimes I'll write right in observation 3, I'll write, or Jen will write, hey, I think intermediate might be a good idea. What do you think? And so then that's a cue for you to be thinking about that too.